Good evening and welcome to Off the Shelf. I'm going to read what's left of Chapter 4 to Resident Evil Zero Hour. Enjoy. Christ on a cross. Billy stared, his mouth hanging open, his mind numb with the impossibility of the thing not 10 meters in front of him. It might have looked something like a scorpion. If scorpion grew as big as sports cars, the monster that fell through the train's roof was insectile, maybe 3 meters long, with a pair of giant armored claws snapping around its flat face, a long bloated tail that curved over its back, that ended in a curled stinger bigger than Billy's head. There were multiple legs, but Billy wasn't in a counting mood. Not with this thing moving towards him, emitting a sound like an overheated engine as its massive jointed legs pounded across the floor. Rain poured down from the hole in the roof, making the scene all the more hellish. The creature emerging from the wet haze like a bad dream. No time to think, Billy shouldered and cocked the hunting gun and aimed for the thing's low, flat skull. Between the motion of the train and the monstrosity's loping scrabble, it took him a few seconds to be sure of the shot. A few seconds that seemed like an eternity. The creature scrabbled closer, its stiffly haired feet gouging up flaps of the expensive carpet. With each rumbling step, Billy squeezed. Boom! The shotgun slapping against his shoulder hard enough to bruise. A hit, and the thing screeched, a splash of milky fluid erupting from the plated skull. He didn't pause to assess damage, only re-aimed and fired again. Boom! The thing was screeching even louder, but still coming. Billy broke the shotgun, jerking the empty shells out. Dug for more. He fumbled, shells spilling to the carpet, the shrieking monster closing the distance. Fast. Too fast. There was a single shell left in his pocket. He got it out, jammed it home, and brought the rifle up to his hip. This better be the one. The shot hit the monster square in the center of its dark, ugly face, only a meter from where Billy stood, close enough that he felt the heat of gunpowder residue hitting his bare skin, embedding there. Its screech died as a large, jagged chunk of exoskeleton blew out the back of its head, splattering the spasming tail with blood and brain matter. It shivered all over, its huge claws whipping outward, opening and closing, its stinger jabbing at air. With a final gurgling cry, it sank to the floor, seeming to deflate as its heavy claws, its body, came to rest. The smell of it, like dirt and hot, sour grease, was nearly overwhelming. But Billy didn't move for a full minute, wanting to be sure it was dead. He could see where the first 2 rounds had hit. The shotgun pulled slightly to the left, though the final shot had been dead on, chipping away at the thick armor that shaded its beady black eyes. What is it? He stared down at the horror. Not sure he wanted to know. It had to be connected to the dogs and Walking Dead, to the T-virus. That journal he'd found had said something about even small doses causing changes in size and aggressiveness. That means this guy must have snorted a couple of gallons minimum. Accidentally? No chance. The journal also said something about a laboratory and controlling the effects of the virus, about how until they could control it, the company was playing with fire. The implications were clear enough. Maybe the T-virus had gotten out by accident, but this company, whatever it was, had obviously known what it could do beforehand, had experimented with it. For the moment, though, all that mattered was that it was dead, and he was done searching for any key card. Screw going it alone. If the Scorpion King had any brothers or sisters wandering around, Billy wanted someone else to track. Billy wanted someone else to take up the slack. He picked up the shells he'd dropped and reloaded. Then he carefully stepped around the massive, stinking carcass and set off to find Rebecca. Maybe she'd had better luck than he had. Just after she stepped into the front car, Rebecca thought she heard weapon fire from back the way she came. She stood in the doorway, holding on to the frame, staring blankly at the one dead dog visible from her position as she strained to hear. Thunder rumbled outside. After a moment, she gave up and walked toward the front of the train. She moved slowly, steeling herself to see Edward again, wishing she'd thought to grab a blanket or something from the mess back in the passenger cars. Maybe a coat off one of the dead men. She certainly hadn't gotten anything else except a rising sense of indignation with whoever had loosed the T-virus, and a headache from holding her breath. No keys, nothing to help. That train worker's body at the front of the car where she'd met Billy, though. Perhaps a key in its dead hand would turn out to be useful somehow. She reached the turn in the corridor and forced herself past it, skirting the pool of fluids that had leaked from the dog. And Edward was gone. Rebecca stopped, stared. The second dog was still there, but a wad of red gauze and a few bloody splatters were all that remained where Edward's body had been. That and the thick smell of rot. Cool, wet air breezed in through the windows, but the smell was too strong for it. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as she looked down, saw the tracks in the dog blood. She followed them with her gaze, looking toward the front, seeing the boot prints in red, smeared, as though whoever had worn them was drunk or sick. No. She felt for a pulse. Time slowed even more, her gaze finally rising from the floor. She saw the edge of a bare arm, someone standing just out of sight at the end of the hall. Someone tall. Someone wearing boots. No, she said, and Edward stepped away from the wall, stepped into view. When he saw her, his bloodless lips open, a moan emerging. He staggered toward her, his face gray. His eyes filmed almost white. Edward? He kept walking, reeling, his blood-drenched shoulder trailing along the wall, his arms slacked at his sides, his face empty and mindless. This was Edward. This was her buddy, and she raised her handgun, taking a step back, taking aim. Don't make me, she said, a part of her mind wondering at how death-like the virus made its victims seem. Must have slowed his heart rate. Edward moaned again. He sounded desperately hungry, and though his eyes were barely visible, through the haze of white, he could see them well enough to understand that this wasn't Edward anymore. He staggered closer. Be at peace, she whispered, and shot him, the round drilling a neat hole in his left temple. He stood perfectly still for a beat, his expression of dull hunger unchanging, and then collapsed to the floor. Rebecca was still standing there, aiming at the corpse of her friend when Billy found her a few minutes later. Phew, now I'm done. And that's it of Chapter 4 to Resident Evil 0 Hour. As for Off the Shelf and me, I'll see you next time. Good night.